Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast and joining me, as always, my co-host, Stephen Kerr. And if you're a first-timer, Stephen is a sports writer, sports radio personality, lifelong H-Town sports junkie. And this week, he's also overjoyed that Yordan Alvarez is $150 million richer.
Yeah, I'm overjoyed for several reasons, Robert. One of which is that, if Yordan is a nice guy, maybe he'll lend me some of that money. The other reason is really the same reason I think that every Astros fan is. It means we're going to have Yordan until he's at least 31, right? If I'm calculating correctly, that's when his new extended contract will end, Robert. He'll be 31 years old. And so, yeah, great week in Astros here with Yordan getting that extension that, quite frankly, if that hadn't happened, I mean, I know we have lost a number of guys, Correa, Springer and all that, but they waited until those guys went to free agency. Well, they didn't do that with Yordan. They very wisely locked him up for the next few years.
Since he's made his major league debut, his 156 WRC plus, which means he's 56% better than the league average hitter, Stephen, just so you know. It only trails Mike Trout among all qualified hitters during that time. He's currently leading the majors in hard hit rate, expected slugging, and expected WOB. So, Stephen, getting him for $26 million per season in the last 3 years of that deal at ages 29 through it's really 32, because I think he's going to turn 32 by that point. But it's a steal. It's an absolute steal.
It is an absolute steal, and it's good that Yordan was willing to do that. Some players are and some players aren't. Some want to test the waters. They want to get as much as they can get. But I think Yordan, purely enjoys the game of baseball. He hasn't forgotten where he came from. And the fact that he is so loved, with the Astros. And, Robert, here's the thing, is that the questions that people had about Yordan, I think Yordan has addressed them quite nicely. They questioned whether he could play the outfield consistently. Well, he has done that. Is he a great outfielder? No, not yet. But he is certainly average at the very least. And, the issue with the knees, at least to this point, hasn't been an issue. They seem to have both been repaired. And I'll knock on wood just so that we don't, jinx anything. But I think this is one time where you can say that Yordan has risen to the occasion in the areas other than what we expect him to, which obviously is the hitting, and has addressed those areas. And at least at this moment, as we're speaking, they seem to have cleared themselves up. Hopefully they will continue, but you never know with baseball. But I still think it's a great deal nonetheless.
I don't know if there's even a question that Yordan is the Astros' best player, which is strange to say, Stephen, because, this guy's only played, well, not even played 2 full seasons worth of regular season games. He's still over 40 games away from that.
Well, that's the scary thing, is that, he could get better. And if he gets better as an outfielder and, better as a base runner, he's going to be even more of a threat. You talk about a 5-tool player. Well, if he got those skills down, he certainly would be close to that. Yeah, I think that, the fact that he's really just getting started, the 2020 season, the COVID and the knee injuries and that sort of thing slowed him down. But when he came back, Robert, it didn't take him that much time to get going. Certainly not this season.
He is signed longer than any other Astro right now. His contract goes past the Lance McCullers deal. And there are great contracts, and then there are ugly contracts, Stephen. And I got to mention an ugly contract before get out of the contract mode, because Alex Bregman is sitting on the opposite end of the spectrum as we speak. Bregman's hitting .217, his OPS the lowest of his career. Next season and the following season, he'll make $30 million a year. Think about that. I should say his OPS plus is the lowest of his career. I don't know, his OPS might be too, but I for you eggheads, it's OPS plus is lowest of his career.
Yeah, Alex Bregman. I honestly thought that this was the year that Alex Bregman would have a comeback year. I mean, I really predicted that he would be healthier, that he would straighten out some things that obviously slowed him down last year. Well, quite clearly that hasn't happened, Robert. And, if it goes on too much longer, we may be asking the very same questions about Alex Bregman that we did about Carlos Correa a few years ago. Remember how we were talking about wondering if the Astros should trade Carlos Correa, or, is he going to be able to come back from these back injuries and things like that? Well, those questions are going to be plaguing Alex Bregman sooner rather than later. And, some people are already asking them, obviously.
And Dusty keeps looking at his baseball card from 2019. I don't know what's going on. He keeps putting him in the 3 spot. I don't know what he sees.
Well, if we could bottle up what you did in the best season you had, or in 2019 in Alex's case, he might have something there. But unfortunately, you can't do that. Yeah, I looked at the lineup card for, we're recording this, on Tuesday night as the game with Seattle is getting underway. I looked at the lineup card earlier today, Robert, and yeah, Dusty's made some changes, but Alex is still sitting in that 3rd spot. He's not one of them.
Yeah, he just doesn't want to move him. And I don't know if that's just he's trying to give him confidence or whatever, but at some point you got to give up the ghost. One big story right before we started recording, Stephen, we just found out Hector Neris is getting a 4-game suspension for what Major League Baseball calls throwing at the head of Suarez with the Mariners after both teams were warned. Any thoughts on this, Stephen? I thought it was much more egregious than the lame Ryan Presley warning and ejection the night before. But, 4-game suspension for Neris. It just seems like the Astros are getting the back end of all of these umpiring rulings and things like that.
Well, it does. And, it's been a weird week as far as that goes. I mean, the whole Presley thing I thought was such a joke. And I think Ryan Presley definitely has a point. I mean, why are you going to get thrown out of the game because you question, why you're being warned? And that whole situation really, I think, was blown out of proportion. But, the Hector Neris thing, I mean, you don't throw behind a batter. I mean, that's just one of the things you don't do. And he'd been warned. He did it. And yeah, 4 games. I mean, that's, it's doesn't really surprise me too much as I hate to say it. But yeah, that situation certainly may be more warranted than the Ryan Presley situation. I just couldn't understand that.
Neris is going to appeal. I almost wish he would take the suspension because he's not having one of his better stretches right now, if you look at things.
Yeah, he might need the rest anyway. So maybe he should just serve it and get on with it. But, there's a matter of pride with this. He doesn't believe that he did anything wrong. So he's going to take the due process if it's going to be given to him.
They put Mushinski on the IL after an injury and brought up Belak. And maybe I'm missing something, but Stephen, Belak's whip at Sugarland is 141. Not exactly excitement level stuff out of a young prospect who is not a young prospect, FYI. Anoli Paredes, 1.05 whip, 0.41 ERA. What's going on? And it just seems like there must be something we're not seeing in Sugarland that the Astros are, or is this an option issue? How many options they want? They just want to make sure Paredes, when he comes up, he's ready to go for good. But I mean, I loved what I saw from him. He had one bad month or two starting the season after the pandemic year, and he just hadn't gotten a shot again.
Yeah, it's funny how some pitchers, they get it. They start out great, and then they mess up, and you send them to the minors, and you don't see them for maybe a couple of years, if you see them again. And then there are other pitchers that you keep going to time and time again. Brian Abreu is one of them. Brandon Belak's another one, and he's one that they obviously just feel it's a familiar thing, and they just believe that maybe he can give them a little bit more against both right-handers and left-handers than someone like Anoli Paredes, who, as you said, has great stuff, and he got his chance and did pretty well for a while, but maybe they're just not quite ready to go to him just yet.
Yeah, I'm not talking much about the major league level because it just seems like the Astros are in a good place at the moment anyway, and they're doing everything that you want them to do at this point. I mean, there's a bump in the road here and there, but overall, they're playing well. I did want to bring up one thing that leans towards the future. And Stephen, we know the catching position. The guys are getting older. They're closer to retirement. We thought we'd been waiting for Corey Lee in that era to begin at catcher. But as I pointed out on Twitter, Stephen, unless Corey is Maldonado as a defensive catcher, which is not what I hear, then maybe we've got it all wrong. And Luno whiffed on that first round pick. And the answer isn't Corey Lee, who's got a 738 OPS in the minor leagues, and in Sugarland this year, it's a real bad 672. Although for the Astros as catching, if we get a 672, I think we're going to hold a parade.
You're doing pretty good.
But Yainer Diaz, 848 OPS, 821 this year in Corpus. Offensively, Diaz, without question, the better prospect, Stephen, and he could be the steal of this Miles Straw Phil Maton trade. And it just seems like he's more and more the likely successor of the two elderly catchers that the Astros have.
Well, that's really not a surprise. And I think we even talked about that when the trade was made, is, keep an eye on this guy, Diaz, because he was in, I think, A-ball at the time, but they were touting him pretty highly even then. And so far he hasn't disappointed. And, that just goes to show, Robert, that some of the guys who are highly touted just don't cut it. And some that you don't really think about, or they may be in, such low minor leagues, like in Class A, that you just don't give them much thought, but they keep popping up on the radar. And Diaz is one of these guys.
Yeah, will be interesting to find out where the Astros go next with the catching position, because we've been spoiled with Maldonado's defense. Obviously, this offense with the catchers is bad, and I wish one of those guys would step up, and maybe by the end of the year we could see him in the major leagues. And I don't know if Castro is they just got him locked in, and no matter what, he's going to be the backup. But what do you think of Castro, Stephen? Because he must be a hell of a pitch caller, because defensively he's not good, and offensively he's not good. There's too many pass balls and all that.
Yeah, well, he's certainly no Maldonado. There's no question about that. He in the past has been at least somewhat of a better hitter, but he's really not doing that much this year. And I don't think, certainly after this season, I don't think you're going to see a Jason Castro in an Astros uniform. And he's a good guy, and I think the pitchers like him, but the results just aren't speaking for themselves on either side.
Well, he says it's his last year. My thing is it going to be the last year before the end of this year? He says he's done at the end of the year, but that's my point, is I think he could be done, potentially. Well, he could be if one of these guys really, they felt like they were ready. It's a long shot. I'm just saying it would be nice if Diaz was ready, at least from the offensive standpoint, and can give you an inning or two in the playoffs, but at least be somebody that you could pinch hit, instead of, who we got to pinch hit if something happens to, in the late innings and Maldonado's spot in the order comes up. It just seems like you got nobody.
Well, I don't know if you're going to see Diaz quite as soon. And a lot of it depends on whether they make a move at the trade deadline and try to get a backup catcher. I don't know that they're looking in that direction. It might be a little early for Diaz, to come in this season. But the fact that, they did trade Michael Papierski, I can never say his name right. So that clears the way for something. And, the next month and a half or so, anything could happen, whether it's the trade deadline or somebody gets hurt. Then you may have to dip into that system, and somebody like Diaz could be up sooner than we expect.
And I guess it matters a lot more this year with offense at catcher, because, the rest of the lineup hasn't looked as good. And if you can get Yuli going and Brantley, going a little bit better, and some of these other guys that you're used to hitting well, obviously Bregman that we just talked about, I mean, that would be huge. Were there any other Astro notes that you had, Stephen? Anything that you've thought about over the last few days?
Well, we haven't talked much about the great season that Corey Julks is having in Sugarland. I mean, that's a guy you probably want to keep an eye on too. When we're talking about outfielders on our last podcast, depending on what he keeps doing, we might see him sooner rather than later. It's just all depending, but just a name to keep an eye on. And we've seen him in spring training a little bit over the past couple of years, but boy, he's doing some great things with the Space Cowboys right now.
Yeah, former Cougar, hitting a ton of home runs. You hope it keeps going and it translates, but just wait and see. I mean, of course, Jake Myers got his minor league stint going, so that's the guy you hope is going to rescue a little bit in the outfield more than anybody. We'll see what happens with him. I want to get to your This Week in Astros history, Stephen, in a bit, but another big thing that happened right before you and I went on: the Angels fire Joe Madden and name Astros legend Phil Nevin as their interim manager. And I don't know if you remember this, Stephen, but the Astros drafted Nevin with the first overall pick in the 92 draft. He gets called up in 95, only gets 69 total plate appearances. They send him to AAA Tucson. He cusses out manager Terry Collins and GM Bob Watson when they did that. He was not happy about that. And not long after that, Nevin gets dealt to the Tigers for somebody named Mike Henneman. Do you remember this whole story?
I don't remember Mike. Well, I do remember the name Mike Henneman. I do remember that whole Nevin situation, Robert. And I also remember he was another guy that everybody was talking about. Oh, look out for this guy, Phil Nevin. He's going to come in here and do some great things. And well, he did more things with his mouth than he did with his bat. A very fiery, competitive player for sure. But yeah, cussing out your manager and GM, not something I'd recommend if you want to go up the totem pole with any organization, whether it's a regular company or baseball. But yeah, Phil Nevin as a manager, that should be interesting to see. I guess, if they were looking to light a fire under the Angels, well, maybe they picked the right guy, but I don't know. That was a long time ago. Maybe he's smoothed things out since then, but yeah, very interesting choice, I must say, for the Angels.
Well, you might wonder why he would have cussed those guys out and what was going on. This is the part of the story which I bet you don't remember, Stephen. The Astros trade Ken Caminiti to the Padres before that season. So with Caminiti no longer there, Nevin hoped he's going to be named the starting third baseman that season, but they did not invite him to spring training. Nevin attributed the snub to his refusal to work out with replacement players during the work stoppage. Remember, this is the 94-95 season. So in that area where they had the work stoppage. So here's the story. Not wanting to be seen as scabs by the MLB Players Association, minor league players who felt they'd play in the bigs after the resolution of the strike felt pressured to avoid playing with replacement players. So when Nevin and Billy Wagner refused to play with the replacements, Bob Watson issued an ultimatum saying anyone who refused to play in the team's first exhibition game would be sent out of camp until further notice and held in breach of contract. The Astros send Nevin back to Tucson to start the 95 season. So that would have pissed him off. And Dave Magadan, he starts at third base on opening day. So Nevin's a little pissed. Then he gets dealt. And you said, wasn't a good hitter with the Astros, but you know what? People forget this. He was an 814 career OPS guy in 12 major league seasons. He turned into, but he
did later on. He did after he left the Astros. He did pick it up, but when he was with them in their organization, he was not all that everybody was cutting him out to be. I do remember that. I don't remember the Nevin situation in that respect. I certainly remember the controversy about the replacement players. And there were a number of players around the major leagues who did that. I don't remember, Nevin specifically doing that. So that's a good reminder.
Yeah, here's another great part of the Phil Nevin story. You got Astros scout Hal Newhouser quitting because he wanted to draft another guy with the first pick in the draft, not Phil Nevin. And his name, Stephen, who was that guy that he wanted to draft?
Tell me.
Derek Jeter.
Oh, that Derek Jeter. I think I've heard of him. Didn't he play for the Yankees or somebody? And that name sounds vaguely familiar. Well, yeah, Hal, you got it right. Unfortunately, you just couldn't convince your club to get it right.
Oh, yeah. And it was, I think some money had a lot to do with that situation.
Well, too. Sure.
Which, not surprising. Trivia question for you, Stephen. Who's the only pitcher to ever win back-to-back MVP awards? Do you know?
Not offhand.
Former Astros scout Hal Newhouser.
Oh, really? Now, I never would have guessed that. I never would have guessed that.
Yeah, that's the guy that wanted Jeter. Hall of Famer. He knew what he was doing.
He obviously, and even as a pitcher, you certainly know a good hitter when you see one if you face him every day, right?
Yeah. And got a quick note before we go into your Astros this week in Astros history. The next topic is going to be fun after we get the Astros history. But if you missed it, I had an NBA draft expert, Corey Tulliva, on the pod yesterday. Great Rockets conversation. Go check it out. The draft just a couple of weeks away. 2 weeks from Thursday, believe it or not. So you need to go check out Corey. And let's get to it, Stephen. What's your This Week in Astros history?
Well, what I have, Robert, is occurred on June 4th, 1989. You know, the Astros have had some marathon games, but this was one of them. They beat the Dodgers 5-4 in a 22-inning marathon. Rafael Ramirez, remember him? Well, he got the game-winning hit to score. Bill Doran, I know you remember him. The Dodgers had Jeff Hamilton, a position player, pitching. Fernando Valenzuela, yes, the pitcher, was playing first base in that inning, and Ramirez's hit glances off Valenzuela's glove. The game took 7 hours and 14 minutes. And if that wasn't enough, Robert, the two teams, because, you know, it ended up going into the next day, right? So the two teams played another extra inning game later that afternoon. And the Astros won that one 7-6 in 13 innings when Mike Scott pitched in relief and he hit a game-winning sac fly. Well, that's something we're never going to see again now that the DH is in both leagues, Robert.
And the other interesting note about that game where Mike Scott hit the sac fly, there was a high school student named Robert Land in the stands for that particular game. And I could not believe that I was stuck with this game where everybody was going to be exhausted after 22 innings. And that game was just fantastic. My favorite part about that entire game, Stephen, in extra innings, Craig Reynolds, who was a career shortstop. I never remember him playing anywhere but shortstop. Maybe he played another infield position like
he did occasionally play some other infield positions, yes.
He ends up in left field. And there's with one out, there's a ball hit into the outfield to Craig Reynolds. And it's the sinking liner or sinking, Texas leaguer into left field. And Craig Reynolds comes up. He can't quite get there to catch it, but he gets it on a quick short hop and he's going towards home when that happens with the runner on third base. And the guy's got to wait because, if he catches it, it's a sac fly opportunity. And so he has to take off at that point. And Craig Reynolds, like a shortstop, one hops it and sidearms it to home plate and throws him out for the out to save the run and send it to another. I mean, this was an extra inning to send it to another extra inning games. And Mike Scott, remember, 2 games before that had outdueled Fernando Valenzuela in an incredible game to, another one of, many incredible games Mike Scott had in that era. But he won the game and then he gets the sac fly 2 games. And he was a terrible hitter, if you remember.
He was a terrible hitter. He was one of those guys that you kept wishing that, the designated hitter would come to the National League because, yeah, he was certainly not. But so that's interesting. So you actually ended up being a part of my This Week in Astros history, Robert. And back then, you didn't even realize it.
I think I was in the skybox for that game, too.
Wow,
and
that's awesome.
And if I remember correctly, and you looked it up, I'm sure, I believe it was Craig Biggio hits a home run in the 9th inning in that 13th game.
Yeah, I believe he did. He did.
And he tied the game and sent it to extra. It was unreal. That whole weekend was unreal. That whole streak that the Astros, they ended up winning 16 out of 17. The one game that they lost was when Mark Portugal got called up, and Mark Portugal made an entire career after that call up because he pitched really well and stayed in the major leagues. And the Astros ended up in that 16 out of 17. They faced Mark Davis, who won the Cy Young as a reliever that year. And in 2 games, they got Mark Davis to take a L in the 9th inning. And those were the only 2 blown saves Mark Davis had the whole year. Like I said, he won the Cy Young Award. So incredible stretch of baseball for the Astros.
Well, there you have it, my This Week in Astros history. It was quite something.
Yeah, I can't remember what I had for breakfast, but I remember all of that for some reason. Next topic, and boy, we talked about Yordan Alvarez and that contract, and we said, well, maybe that's the best Houston sports news in the last week, or maybe it wasn't the best Houston sports news of the last week, Stephen. Maybe it was the second best sports news because, well, do you know where I'm going with this? What do you think could be number 1?
Well, you're not going, are you leaning toward the Romeo retirement?
Oh, no.
I didn't think so. Because that's not the best news.
Now,
That's actually some sad news in my regard.
yeah, we're going to get to that pretty soon. But no, it's Marcus Sasser is not entering the NBA draft.
Yeah, that is great news. Boy, I tell you what, when I saw that, I was very, very happy. I think as he put it, we've got some unfinished business.
The Cougs backcourt now is Sasser, Tremont Mark, and Jamal Shed. Don't forget, they also got a McDonald's All-American in the front court. And I want to say AP, Stephen, had them ranked number 3 in the top 25 coming out of the gate.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And I tell you what, Kelvin Sampson just keeps adding it on. We hope that Tremont Mark can come back and have a much better season. I mean, he battled injuries all year long. So, maybe this next season will be when he puts it all together, because he was certainly crucial the year before. But yeah, putting those guys together and then getting Sasser back, I mean, that is big, because honestly, I wasn't too confident about that happening until he announced that.
Yeah, we've seen these other Cougar players that go in early and say, well, they might end up changing their mind. They don't. And Sasser is a guy that, can create shots for you. And you're in a NCAA tournament situation. And how huge would it be to have a Marcus Sasser out there that can get you, but can score 20 at any particular time, can handle the basketball. I mean, it's just, I can't even tell you how cool that was. If you were rooting for the Cougars, I mean, it's probably the best offseason news that you could have outside of, getting another great recruiter too, I'm sure.
Well, I think really it's the best news the Cougars have had, the basketball team has, since they made sure to re-sign Kelvin Sampson. That was pretty big news too in the offseason. But yeah, this is big for sure.
All right. You mentioned what I was coming up next on, which is Romeo Crennel retiring after 50 years. And it is sad news because, man, what a career. He's coached on 17 playoff teams that won 13 division titles, 6 conference titles, 5 Super Bowls. He helped the Texans win 4 division titles and 2 playoff games in 5 years as defensive coordinator. When he coached for the Texans, he became the oldest NFL head coach in history, which is, something that's it might be there for a while. He was 73 years old. I don't know if that's going to happen anytime in the near future. And 5 of his assistant coaches became NFL head coaches, including current coaches Brian Daboll and Nick Sirianni over with the Eagles. And Stephen, I'd say he was also the only universally beloved coach under Bill O'Brien, by the fans, of course, I mean.
Well, I think that's certainly right. And, ironically enough, Robert, he was, of course, a contributor to the Patriots winning 3 Super Bowls. And you know how we feel about the Patriots. But when it comes to Romeo Cornell, look, they're just some guys you can't help but like. And it's not just, their success on the field, but it's the type of person they are, their integrity, their character. And Romeo Cornell was one of those guys. And look, when even in an advisory role, don't make no mistake, he was very much a part of the Texans defense, even when he wasn't the defensive coordinator. So not having him around in any capacity, yeah, it's going to be weird to look up and not see Romeo Cornell anywhere near that. And he may make some appearances every once in a while. You know how retirement is. You kind of get bored and you might pop up in once, every once in a while and say hi, maybe pass along a tip or two. But yeah, definitely sad to see Romeo Cornell go. What a guy.
Yeah, he kept class in the building when Bill O'Brien was in the building. He was one of the few parts of that. I was out there a ton between 2013 and 2018 and saw the way he handled himself. Just a really good guy, and coached under Bill Belichick and Bill Parcells, and they'll get all the credit, but make no mistake, it's not an accident if Romeo's coaching under both of those guys as they're going to Super Bowls and doing great things. And some of the guys that he coached over the years, I mean, some of those great Giants linebackers, remember that, Stephen? I mean, just
Right.
LT,
Right.
and I mean, just so many fantastic players with the Giants, and then as well with the Patriots. So, and then he's a guy named JJ Watt, whatever
Yeah, there is
guy.
that guy. I mean, look, at 50 years of coaching, can you just imagine the long list of names, big names that Romeo Cornell coached? I mean, that's pretty impressive to look at, I'm sure.
Yeah, and JJ and LT in the same career, and we're talking probably 2 of the best 4 or 5, probably best Three defensive players ever. 4 or 5, maybe a stretch. Reggie White and maybe those two guys are the conversation. At least for me, they're kind of the conversation. But yeah, incredible career. Last thing I had, Stephen, need to do 3 more hat tips besides Romeo this week. Number 1, Coco Gauff graduates from high school while she was at the French Open, and then she makes her first major championship final. So quite a week for her. Second hat tip, Iga Swiatek won her 35th straight match in the French Open finals. Not only are both Coco and Iga great young players, but when you hear them speak, you can't help but be impressed with them as human beings. Total class. Women's tennis is in good hands. I loved both watching them and listening to them over the last couple of weeks at the French. And the third hat tip, Stephen, you know where I'm going with this. Rafael Nadal, 14th French Open championship. Pete Sampras retired as the leader in majors with 14. Nadal has 14 just at the French. What else can you say about him?
Is this guy a machine? I mean, he can't be human. So he must be a machine that just keeps cranking it out. I mean, that is just absolutely impressive. And, getting back to Coco Gauff, can you imagine if somebody asked her, so, what'd you do in your high school graduation? What? I played in the French Open. Just like a common everyday thing that everybody does, right? Yeah, that's pretty impressive. All 3 of those.
Yeah, and Iga was repping the Ukraine and talked about the Ukraine after the finals, and then you had Nadal. His semifinal opponent goes down with looked like broke his ankle, or I haven't caught what they ended up saying that it was, but he goes down in the second set, and it was gonna be a great match. It was already heading there. It was like 3 hours and 2 sets, and he goes down, and he's they're back in the locker room, and what happens is he finds out that he's not going to be able to play. So Rafa comes out and starts picking up and cleaning up his stuff out there for him. Nadal, man, that guy is just not only incredible tennis player, but one of the best human beings that we've seen in the history of tennis.
Well, it's interesting that, you followed up Romeo Cornell when you're talking about class, with a guy like Rafael Nadal, who not only is a great player, but is also a man of class. So yeah, you're talking about that guy is as classy a player as he is a great player.
Nothing that comes out of his mouth is anything but the perfect thing to say after a tournament. I mean, he is one of the guys that you can't help but be happy for him when he wins because of the way he treats everybody and the way he acts. It's just love Rafa.
Well, quite a contrast when you talk about some of the other great players like John McEnroe, Jimmy Connors, guys like that. It's been a while back for them, but they were great players, certainly, but they were not dull on the court either. But you would never see somebody like Rafael Nadal do something like what those guys did.
Great week for everything, the tennis, Yordan, Marcus Sasser, all of it. And good to catch up with you as always, Stephen. Thanks so much.
You bet, Robert. Yep. It just seems to never be a dull moment in Houston sports. Even when we think things are going to calm down, they don't. So always good to catch up with you. We'll do it again soon.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Don't forget to follow Houston Sports Talk on Facebook and Twitter. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, the Google Podcast app, or the Stitcher app. You can support us by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or by telling your friends about us. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.